Hello, fsharp. Welcome back. Today, one of the things I wanted to do is unpack an article I recently wrote, which was titled, "Who Has Inspired You?" Now, I was having a discussion on Twitter, and then someone asked me this question, essentially saying, like, who has influenced me in the way I think about programming to kind of help me stay humble. And so, really, this video is kind of a celebration of the people in my life that have been inspirational and helpful. So it's really a thank you to them is really what it is. And the first person I wanted to mention is a friend of mine named Justin. Now I'm omitting his last name for privacy. He's not really a public figure. So I'm just trying to be considerate of him. Justin represents that first mentor that we have. And I don't know if everyone gets to have this experience, but I have been incredibly grateful for the mentors that I've had in my life. People who have come along and helped me through difficult times, learn difficult subjects, kind of break through those things. And Justin was one of those people for me. I was working at a company called Siltronic. It is a silicon wafer manufacturer. And for those of you who don't know what that is, silicon wafers are what you use to make computer chips out of. So we would create silicon wafers from a silicon ingot, and then we would sell those wafers to people like Samsung, TSMC, Intel, and there's actually a large number of semiconductor manufacturers. It's not just Intel, Samsung, and TSMC. There are many companies. UMC is another one, and it's a much larger industry than what we may be aware of as software developers. It's actually really fascinating. And this facility that I was working at is based in Portland, Oregon. It was the 200 millimeter facility. And what was interesting about this situation is that I was an industrial engineer at the time. I was not a software developer. And what was really clear to me is that there were challenges with the manufacturing in that there was too much work in progress, often referred to as WIP. And when WIP goes up, when the work in progress goes up, the cycle time necessarily goes up as well. And the real challenge with that is that you would have a manufacturing step, and then it would have to go to a metrology step. And a metrology step is where they would measure features of the wafer. And that metrology would provide feedback to the manufacturing step saying, hey, you need to tweak something or you need to change something. But if you have a lot of WIP built up, that causes a long time delay between the manufacturing step and when you get metrology feedback. And so that could cause large excursions and then cause a lot of rework. And so there's this huge problem. We need to get this WIP down. And as an industrial engineer, I could look at the problem and say like, oh, I see what's going on here. Leadership was concerned that if we reduce WIP, that we're not going to get high utilization of some critical machines, which were bottlenecks in our facility. And I said, no, we can do this. We just need to implement the right algorithms. The problem was that we needed a developer to write these algorithms. The IT department was completely bogged down with the work that they had just supporting the facility and building the necessary tools to actually run the machines. They didn't have extra people to be able to write these algorithms. So I was like, oh, well, I could do it. I had, done some silly things in VBA and QBasic back in the day. Like, how hard could it be? Hard. But fortunately, Justin was a developer who'd been working in the supply chain group. He had grown, he is kind of the definition of that self-taught developer. He had worked out on the operating floor and got inspired to do some scripting. Eventually picked up Groovy and Grails and SQL and turned himself into a developer. And so he was working in the supply chain group as a developer, and I'm there working beside him. And so I said, hey, I could probably write the thing, but we need to integrate it into the tools that you've made. And so Justin was that first mentor for me who kind of really helped take me through the process of writing some software and integrating it and deploying it, working with a VM. There's a lot of aspects to doing software development in the real world that it's difficult to get from a course. And you end up learning it on the job, and it makes it a lot easier when there's someone there to walk you through it. And so Justin was that key person who kind of gave me the confidence to really start doing software development more seriously. And so I owe a great deal to him. And it was great because with that project, we were very successful. We dramatically reduced the amount of WIP in the facility. Cycle times went down, quality improved, and we ended up getting awards for that. And so that was really fantastic. But a lot of my story begins here with Justin as my mentor early on. And so I would be remiss to not mention him right off the bat. These people are generally in chronological order of my life experience. And so that is the sorting of these things. Next is the kind of classic one is Don Syme. Now, after I had moved on from Siltronic, I was working at another company. We were optimizing our supply chain for what we purchased that we would sell on the Amazon marketplace. And so there's a lot of statistics involved in that, looking at demand signals, pricing signals. And R is a great statistics calculator, but it is a very poor production language. And so I was reaching for hey, I need to implement this in a language that's better suited for writing production-worthy software. And I had dabbled in fsharp years before, and I was aware of the units of measure feature, and I said, you know what? I really like that feature. It really fits our needs. We have a lot of data transformation problems. And so I decided to reach back out. And this is where I really actually started to learn fsharp properly. And what I ended up doing is I say hey, I was kind of curious, this fsharp language, I like it, but where did it come from? What was the inspiration behind it? And so I started digging into the backstory of fsharp, and obviously I come across Don Syme, who's the one that created the fsharp language. Don Syme is also largely responsible for generics and .net, and he has some pretty incredible technical accomplishments, but what really impressed me and still impresses me about Don Syme is the way he treats people and the way he answers questions. I mean, the guy has incredible street cred in terms of what he's done, but you would never, I've never sensed any pride or arrogance coming from Don, even though, when you look at what he's done, my goodness. And so, and he's also incredibly patient. And kind of as a joke here, I mentioned that he appears to have infinite patience with people continually asking for higher kind of types in fsharp. And this is kind of a joke at this point when it comes to fsharp. And so for me, Don is, for me, kind of an example of what a brilliant engineer is who's also still kind of grounded and humble and kind to people. And so, yes, I appreciate that he made a fantastic language that I enjoy working with every day. But more than that, it's the marrying of the character with the technical capability, because there's a lot of very accomplished people who are also a-holes. And so that for me is where I find the most inspiration when it comes to Don. Now, Rich Hickey is an interesting character. I've never actually written any Clojure, but in my wanderings on YouTube, I have found his talks to be very enlightening and change the way I think about software, change the way I think about programming. And I cite in here my favorite one, which is titled Simplicity Matters. And I think this one has a tremendous amount of value for people working in any language. And he has a really great way of kind of distilling ideas and distilling concepts down to their bare essence. And so I would definitely encourage you to go and check out his content. I haven't regretted watching any of his talks. They have all expanded the way I've thought in some ways. So highly recommend the work that he is doing. Now, Mark Seaman is, he's got a special place in my heart. I'm not going to lie. So early on when I was starting to delve into functional programming and trying to understand what it is and how did it work, I come across his blog. And he has a fantastic blog, and he writes very well and very clearly on these kind of out there concepts. But what I actually really appreciate most about Mark is that during the first NDC Minnesota conference, they had a option to go on a boat ride, some cruise along the river in St. Paul, to kind of have like a tour of the city, and they were going to serve dinner and drinks. And while I was on there, Mark was also on the boat, and I was kind of like a little starstruck. At the time, I was like, "Oh my goodness, it's Mark!" And I had so many questions, and I was very, oh my goodness, such a newbie. Even though I've been writing F sharp for several years at this point, I still felt like an absolute child. And I was able to go and just sit down with Mark, and we chatted for 2 hours, probably the entirety of that boat ride. And then throughout the conference, we sat down and talked some more, and I really appreciated just you read his work and it's just like, wow, this person is really intelligent. And you definitely kind of get that feeling. It's like, I'm someone very smart wrote this, and it still communicates really well, but it just has that kind of weight to it. But then when you sit down with him, like, Mark is incredibly approachable. He is incredibly kind and gracious. And he was, very patient with all the questions that I had. And it was really funny because at one moment I was expressing my frustration with trying to understand what a monad is. And he says like, "Oh, Matthew, it's just a select many." And I was just like, oh, that makes so much sense. And now I have lost the capability of explaining what a monad is. That's the joke. It's like, the idea is like, you either don't understand a monad, or once you understand what a monad is, you lose the ability to explain what a monad is. So apparently I've lost the ability. So again, one of those kind of luminaries in the F sharp space, just kind of speaking on functional programming, and been very much inspired by his work. And then we get to Scott Voloshin. Every F sharp developer at some point goes on a pilgrimage to F sharp for fun and for profit. And I kind of have this joke that, like, I think of Scott Voloshin as like the Santa Claus of F sharp. It's the beard. It's the beard, man. And he's got a great laugh too. And I've loved hanging out with him at NDC, Minnesota. So he definitely has that kind of like warm, inviting spirit, and it definitely comes across in his talks. And so again, what inspires me about him is, again, he marries pragmatism with these high level concepts. Like, if you go and read his content, it's very clear that he has a deep understanding of functional programming, all these complex subjects. But when he goes to give a presentation, it's given in simple to understand terms and in simple to understand examples, which for me really illustrates an excellence, a technical proficiency, a really deep understanding of a subject. When you're able to distill it down to simple concepts that the rest of us can understand, that tells me like you really understand what's going on. And so again, Scott Voloshin is kind of an inspiration to me with his technical capability, his ability to communicate, and just his overall spirit in interacting with people. So he makes F sharp kind of warm and approachable as a language. John Carmack, a man who really does not need any introduction and is considered by many to be one of the best developers alive. There's a lot I could say about John Carmack and how he has inspired me. Part of it is that he did not complete college. So again, an example of a largely self-taught developer. And if you haven't read the book Masters of Doom, it's a treat. It's fantastic. And the audiobook is narrated by Will Wheaton, who does a fantastic job narrating it. But a lot can be said about John Carmack, but for me, the big one comes down to this quote. And this quote comes from an interview that Lex Friedman did with John Carmack. And the quote is, "You can't learn everything, but you have to convince yourself that you can learn anything." And this, when I heard it, I was like, whoa, you're blowing my mind at this point. And I have often beat myself up over not knowing things like networking. Networking still scares me. There's a lot of subjects in software development that I don't have much expertise with. I find very difficult. And so I always beat myself up over that. And just like, Matthew, you're not very good at what you do. There's all these things you don't know. But what I took away from this comment is saying like, hey, it is insane. It is insane to think that I can learn all these things. I can't. I'm a finite human being with a finite set of time. But if I choose to apply myself to particular areas, I can become incredibly skilled and proficient in those particular areas. And that is part of why I've decided to focus on, F# and high performance code, because I see that there's always going to be a need to be able to write fast code. And to do that well takes experience, takes skill, takes understanding. And so this quote is directly responsible for me deciding to really focus on that area of writing high performance code. And I also enjoy it. But this was like a validation, like, hey, Matthew, you can get really good at this. That is possible. It's just going to take some time. So fantastic quote from him. There's a lot more I could say, but got a few more people here. Okay, now it's getting spicy. Jonathan Blow is a very divisive figure. He rubs a lot of people the wrong way. He is perfectly willing to state his opinions very strongly, and he is literally possibly the polar opposite of Don Tsai when it comes to temperament. Now, and I don't agree with Jonathan Blow on all of his different thoughts, but there is a very specific thing that Jonathan Blow, by just being himself, has helped me. And it comes down to here, where I was doing research to learn high performance code. I'm looking at game engines, and then I come across the fact that Jonathan Blow is working on this language Jai, right? And some people say it's vaporware. It does exist. It is real. And what really helped me is that Jonathan Blow is more than willing to say OO is dumb, and that it's a terrible way to compose software. Now, I am not necessarily making that statement, but what inspired me is the fact that here's this guy, he's accomplished, he's putting out some successful video games, he gives fantastic talks, he's clearly very intelligent, and he's saying that OO is garbage. Now, how does that help me? Well, it comes down to this. I cannot tell you how dumb object orientation has made me feel. I definitely despaired early in my career when I tried to pick up books on C# and object orientation, C++, like how do you do this? Like my mind was incompatible with object orientation. So I always felt incredibly foolish. And it's like, okay, I can't be a real programmer. I can do some basic scripting, but like this stuff is just beyond me. But then this character, Jonathan Blow, comes along and he's saying it's dumb. And then I was like, it kind of gave me permission to think about like, maybe the problem isn't with me. Maybe the problem is with OO. Maybe OO is really hard. Maybe OO is insane in certain situations. Maybe I can be a real programmer. So it's the fact that Jonathan is willing to speak against industry norms and to call out BS that I have found very helpful. Now, there's another aspect of this story that kind of gives me I have a different emotional response to Jonathan Blow than some people. And it comes down to the fact that I had some questions years ago, and this is before I had done any content on YouTube. I am a nobody at this point. And I had several questions that I had for him about like, hey, how do you get better at your craft? How do you improve? Things of that nature. And I honestly did not expect to hear back from him. This guy's really busy. He's doing all kinds of stuff. I'm some rando. But he ends up writing me this long, detailed, encouraging letter back. And I was just like, whoa, what is this? And that kind of changed my perspective on the man. Like, yes, he has a lot of divisive thoughts. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not saying you have to like Jonathan Blow, but I'm just saying he has certainly helped me in giving me the freedom to think differently than the OO way of thinking, and that maybe I'm not dumb. Maybe I'm not stupid. Maybe that way of composing software is difficult. And Maybe you can be a real developer. It just won't necessarily be with an object-oriented programming language. Maybe you should stick to the functional side. Your mind seems to be more compatible with that. So this is why I am grateful and have been inspired by Jonathan Blow. And lastly is Casey Muratori. And so, yes, we're going to end with a little bit more spice on this meal. And kind of similar to Jonathan Blow, although, man, I don't know if, we're not going to give out abrasiveness scores here, but Casey certainly has no problem with calling out the industry for some crazy things. In his video, the clean code horrible performance did make Twitter very interesting for a few days. But where Casey really inspires me is just his enormous generosity. He has spent countless hours creating the Handmade Hero video series showing people how to write software. He also went and created the Performance Aware programming course, which I am a part of, and it is fantastic and has been very helpful for me as I've learned to write better performing software. And apart from Casey's technical capabilities, what really impresses me is that he's willing to create solutions to the problems that he's pointing out. He doesn't just say like, hey, this is dumb, this is stupid, and that's it. He's saying this is dumb, this is stupid, and hey, here's some help. He's doing something to address the situation instead of just complaining. And I think that is fantastic. And he is largely responsible for inspiring me to create the Fast F-sharp YouTube channel because I wanted to offer solutions. I want to have fast code. And so the way I am addressing that is by creating content and getting feedback from people. I mean, I'm not purporting to be like the expert on writing the fastest F-sharp code possible, but I'm aspiring to be, which is why I appreciate feedback from people saying, hey, Matthew, you could do this better, you could do that better. And so lastly, what I wanted to mention is the F-sharp community. The F-sharp community is incredible. And there's a joke that people come to F-sharp for the language, but they stay for the people. They stay for the community because they're wonderful. And I can't tell you the number of crazy questions that I've asked on the F-sharp Slack that people have taken the time to respond to. And so I'm immensely thankful for that community. And it's why I will likely be running F-sharp for a long time from now. So thank you very much for spending some time with me. Who are people that have inspired you when it comes to software development? Who are people that have changed the way that you think about software development or inspired you to do things that you didn't think you could do before? I would love to hear those. Please go down in the comments because I would like to have some more people to be inspired by. So until next time, thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.